Good morning, friends. And today, interesting talk by a chap whose usual job is a little different from what he's going to talk to us about. I think you'll recognize the name, so I need to say no more. But Don today is going to talk to us on perspective of humanism. Don.
Well, good morning, everyone. I've always admired the Quakers or the Society of Friends, and I feel that they have more similarities than differences from my own perspective, which is humanism. And perhaps I should begin by trying to define humanism. It's been done in various ways, but the 5 statements might give some idea, and I'll read them out. Humanists believe that there's a rational basis for morality and that we should treat all humans with kindness, and this includes those who disagree with us. Humanists believe that science is the best way to discover truth. Humanists believe that we have only one life, the one we are in now, and that meaning and purpose have to be achieved in that. Humanists believe that all supernatural religions fail the test of evidence. Humanists believe in a secular society in which no religion or worldview is privileged, not even humanism. Everyone must be free to choose and practice their own beliefs as long as these cause no harm to others. The first of these statements is about morality. Humanists believe that there is a rational basis for morality, and we notice that humans of all races and cultures and beliefs work within very similar moral codes. Morality has evolved during our long history as social animals. Some have asked how anything other than selfishness could evolve in the survival of the fittest. But it's easy to see that in ancient societies, someone who could get along with others would leave more descendants than someone who was completely selfish. Of course, evolution has left us with an instinct to cheat sometimes, but we also have an instinct to join with others to prevent cheating. Much of our discourse is devoted to this, and we have invented laws, locks, fences, passwords, contracts, and many other arrangements to prevent cheating. In particular, we develop moral codes, which differ between societies. Humanists believe in a moral code which is based on kindness as far as possible and support the golden rule. The second one is a belief in science. Humanism is not a religion, but like others, it's a belief system. But we try as far as we're able to derive our beliefs from evidence and not from faith. We might ask, why is evidence better than faith? Evidence is drawn from observation and is likely to correspond with reality. The problem with faith is that it could be directed at many different and even contradictory things, as indeed it is in different communities. The third is a belief that we have only one life. This is not popular and not one that we rejoice in, but it is one for which the evidence is compelling. Science has demonstrated that consciousness, one's soul, if you like, is the action of billions of nerve cells inside our heads. It's unlikely to survive their decay. Heaven and hell, we feel, are only the inventions of ancient priests to motivate their listeners. It's not welcome news, but is it so bad? Mark Twain said, "I was dead for billions of years before I was born, and it didn't cause me the slightest inconvenience." The fourth is that religions are not true. Some religious people say you cannot prove it, but when the evidence is examined, there is, in my view, proof beyond any reasonable doubt. The evidence comes from many directions: biology, neuroscience, comparative religion, scriptural scholarship, geology, astronomy, and the problem of evil. The evidence is, in my view, pretty strong. and that in its favor is only unsupported assertion. And the fifth one is tolerance. Humanists support a secular society in which everyone is free to choose and believe what they wish and to tell others about it. No one should be able to enforce their views on anyone else, and no belief system should be privileged, not even humanism. No humanist would ever be violent or even unfriendly to someone of another belief. And certainly no humanist has ever been violent to another humanist because he was the wrong sort of humanist. That's a very quick introduction to my view of humanism. Others might have explained it differently, and maybe some other thoughts will emerge. As I said, I have great admiration for the Society of Friends. It must have taken great courage in the 18th century to break away from the established church. I can understand why there would be no complete rejection of religious belief at that time. The pressure to conform was immense, and science that we rely on today had not been discovered. But how clear thinking it was to realize that religion did not need intermediaries in the form of priests. Many of the ethical principles we hold in common. The big difference, I suppose, is that most people using the humanist label today, perhaps different from them in the past, they do not believe in a supernatural God. Although there is some variation, many would call themselves atheists, some agnostics, and some even entertain some supernatural possibilities. I understand that most Quakers do believe in God, although one website I visited said that there are some agnostics and even some humanists. It may be that our two belief systems differ more in degree than in kind. We resemble each other too, in that we do not have special dress or rituals or hymns. Our meetings usually, humanist meetings, usually take the form of a talk by a speaker with discussion afterwards, although sometimes we have purely social meetings. I'm interested in what I've learned about the Quaker style of meeting. Maybe we should think about that too. But perhaps that's enough from me. Maybe we should open the discussion to your questions and viewpoints. I'd like to learn more about your belief system as much as I'm happy to tell you about mine.
Hey, thank you, David.
I've just been recently watching quite a few videos. I was trying to remember the names. It's Sam Harris, but also Christopher Hitchin putting forward very clear positions for being a humanist or an atheist, including some immensely humorous ones, of course, saying that there's no word for somebody who is not an astrologer, and that maybe there shouldn't be a word for somebody who is not a theist in the same way. So I completely take your point about evidence, and indeed the evidence that's out there seems to be that religions are more often than not the cause of conflict rather than the resolvers of conflict, and religions have been used for power. So that too is another case for a more reasoned approach to morality. That's not yet a question.
I think there's no denying that religions have caused people to do some good at times, and they've also caused them to do some harm.
And the central position of a lot of religions is that there is some kind of inspiration for a central teacher, what presumably can be called divine inspiration. And the founders, as it were, of religions are, as often as not, really great people, really great humans who seem to possess something extra. And I'm quite interested at the moment that there's a real discussion coming up. I mean, you probably know this, but the big problem in science, as it's called, is how consciousness arises in the functioning of the human nervous system. And we're now getting people saying, well, maybe that's because that's not where the seat of consciousness is. And it's fairly unreligious people. I love my favorite saying of a rather strange character, David Icke, is he says, to look for consciousness in the human brain is like looking inside the radio for the announcer. And the model then becomes that the nervous system.
The big weakness in that one is that we know the announcer's coming from outside, and we know where he's coming from through the radio waves, but I don't think the brain is receiving messages from outside.
No, but it can be that it's receiving messages from a deeper level of inside, quantum mechanics and all of those things that are coming up at the moment. We learn that matter is made up of actually energy at rest, and that energy is vibrations in underlying fields. And so there are field theories of consciousness emerging at the moment.
Yes, but there are none of them. I think I've heard these, and they're generally espoused by people who have no expertise in quantum mechanics, and they're just reaching for an excuse to not face reality, in my view.
One of the things which has been stated just a few minutes ago was about religion and war and conflict and the use of it. People down the ages and even today use religion as a reason for going to war. Those people, they're not religious leaders, I would say. They want power, and they're using religion to gain the power. Any religion, however you look at it, the first tenet of each one of those religious is love one another, look after each other, be kind and be gentle to each other. The statement, if your brother does not have a coat, give him yours. And it's that type of thing where I feel religion is. It is the misuse of religion for purposes of killing others you don't like, or who, as you said earlier, who are saying things that you disagree with. This is where we come to a more theological basis. But
it's true that religion has been recruited to the service of power a great many times. Our recent coronation shows it's a carryover from the history of the time when kings use religion to back up their claim to sovereignty, and of course religion used the kings to have a rather nice position. So it was a bit of a holy alliance, if you like to call it that. But and of course people do make religion a cause of war occasionally, but more often the religion is recruited to serve whatever the real cause of war is. Mr. Putin, for example, he's trying to give himself a grander empire, and his Kirill, the Bishop Kirill, is very much serving his purposes by helping him in every way. So these things, it's a big mixture which is complex in every case.
Mm. In the George Fox, the one of the leaders of Quaker religion, when he went into the churches and started to yell at the priests, basically, was because these priests this was a paid position, which was usually brought by your family who lived in London, or the priest might even live in London, and go off to a parish and preach there and get paid to do so. This is the one of the tenets which I think started off the Quakerism thing, is that we all intercede with ourselves to what Quakers would call the spirit. That is us, and not somebody who says, kind of thou shalt not thing, which to me is a big thing about difference about Quakerism.
Yes, I think that's wonderfully admirable. But when you look at the history of religion, especially in earlier times, I think there were probably people who were sincere believers who were functioning as priests, but there were probably people, they and others noticed that it was quite a comfortable living compared to working hard, and it was a good career choice. I'm sure there were less sincere people involved as well.
Yes, it's the you probably heard it, but the more wealthier families, the big wealthy families, their sons who did things like the first son inherited the estate. The second son usually went into the army, and if you had a third son, he was expecting to go into the clergy. It was kind of these jobs type of thing.
Yes, and nowadays, if you look at the houses which are called a rectory or a vicarage, they're all much grander houses than the local people around them, and they tend to be converted and used by the better off today. But they're high level houses, which implies what was happening in the past.
Yes, and well, in the past, you've had lots of rogues and vagabonds and scallywags who have been part of the Christian religion. If you bear with me for 2 seconds.
Well, I suppose there's no field of human activity that doesn't have a few rogues and scallywags in it.
This was a book I recently read, was written by a chap called Matthew Paris, who was an MP for a while, but this was his book that he wrote.
Yeah.
Which is a jolly good read, because it does go on about the as he says, runaway bishops and naughty vicars are a staple of today's tabloid newspapers, and that is only a part of the tradition of colourful clergy dating back for centuries. The church has always had its seamier side, successors too. This is an entertaining book delved into 30 unusual tales from the church. And yes, the church has always been colourful in that sense, but I suppose that's what makes it different.
So I suppose even the Quakers have a few bad eggs, but at least they're not in a position of leadership, because there isn't one.
That is true. True. We have the kind of the system where you do 2 trienniums, and then you have to relinquish your position. with the exception of the recording clerk,
Yes.
who is kind of the kind of nearly the mouthpiece occasionally of Quaker doctrine, and this recording clerk, which is at the moment uh, is Paul, who and I remember him because I looked after him when he was a little boy in Quaker Children and Young People's Group, which I used to help run, and Paul was a young friend in that, and he's now reached the heights of Quaker, which amuses me somewhat.
Mm.
But there you go, Paul Parker. But anyway, I've been rambling, and as usual, so I will stop for a few moments and allow my other friends to actually get in the proverbial word.
I think Hattie had her hand up at one point, but I'm trying to work out what Hattie's doing. Actually, it looks really interesting.
Well, I've switched the sound on. I'm cooking chutney, and that always needs attention for hours. So I'm nearing the end of the 2 hours cooking. But I didn't have my hand up to say anything. I put both thumbs up because I thought Don was absolutely amazingly good at his speaking and explanations and teaching us. Excellent, thank you.
Angela.
I first came across humanism in 1962 when President Kennedy was assassinated. There was a lawyer called Mark Lane, a New York lawyer where I was living, that was asking for volunteers to look, to interrogate the evidence because it didn't seem to add up. And Mark Lane was a humanist. That was the first time I came across that term, and I found it attractive. In New York, in America, in my experience, everybody has to have a religion, you know, and if you don't, you are looked on as a very strange human being. And so I actually volunteered when I was living in New York to interrogate the evidence with a group of people who were interested in finding out what actually happened. And I did go to Mark Lane's house a few times, but then we moved out of New York well before the Warren Commission was published. But I think what attracted me to humanist was the emphasis on rationality, and their journal, which comes out quarterly, actually is published by the Rationalist Association since 1885. So it's older than I thought it was.
Right.
Do you know when humanists began, Don?
The humanist one?
When it began, when it started, you know.
Oh, humanism. There is quite a history. Of course, Christianity has been very heavily enforced in this country. The last person to be executed for atheist views was in 1697. So when it was less than 100 years later when the Quakers began, but it was mostly in Victorian times when there were a few people who formed the Rationalist Press Association and started pushing out fairly strong atheist views. And certain persecution was milder by then, but they were certainly considered unfashionable. A very famous MP was Charles Bradlaugh, who was prevented from taking his seat for some time because he declined to take the oath. And eventually he was given his seat. but after being actually re-elected by his electors, who were determined to have him as their MP. But yes, so there's a history. There's a body called the Ethical Union, which existed for a while, and that morphed into the British Humanist Association at some stage. I don't actually know the history all that well, but it's now known as Humanist UK for some reason. They changed the name, but it comes to the same thing.
Hmm.
But it's quite a long history. And of course, we look at the trends in Western society today, we do see a greater drift away from religion, especially more away from the Church of England than from other religions.
Mm.
But on the other hand, in some parts of the world, you see some religions becoming more vigorous. So the history is something to watch. I'm sure the story is not finished yet.
This is something, a mission, I suppose, which I have, which is that the religion I find hardest to cope with is Catholicism, because of its sheer ideas that you will do, and the kind of nearly pressure from above, which demands so much of the people who come to your church, and the dismissal of that anything that goes wrong with the clergy, they are kind of not dealt with, which I find saddens me greatly, because, there are lots of Catholics who are my friends, and my sister-in-law is one of them. And we have very strong discussions when I go to their house. But the near kind of the pressure of doctrine there, it's one of the Christian religions I find hardest to cope with.
Yes, I think I would find it hard to cope with. It's although I notice that many of the people I know who are Catholics, they seem well adapted to ignoring part of it and living quite a normal life, and they become adapted, I think.
I used to, as a young man, one of the jobs I had was working in a not boarding school first. It was a boarding place for young children, boys and girls, and there was a village, and in this village there were two priests. One of the priests was banned from all the pubs in the village, and there were 4 pubs in the village, and he was banned from all of them because of his alcoholism. And you think, shouldn't your church have done something about that to help you in some way? Because obviously you have a problem. But no, they were much more wanting to keep a lid on it rather than do something about it.
Yes, I think that's true, but I think nowadays the lid has come off, and one or two, it does seem that people sometimes abandon religion because of things like the fact that priests are being a bit naughty, or maybe because the priests disapprove of some of their own ideas of what their relationship should be. And of course, these are not really reasons to say religion is not true. I believe there are heaps of reasons to say that, but these are not some of them. These are just individuals behaving badly.
What's that? Something that was oh, sorry, Ray, you're about to speak.
No, you carry on. Carry on. I'm doing too much talking already, as I said before.
Definitely not. But no, it's just something that's been niggling away at the back of my mind. It was very interesting. I thought the way you work through the different fields of knowledge, and and in the end, it appeared to be the case that spirituality, spiritual awareness, couldn't really exist because we haven't. There is no evidence. All the fields of evidence have been looked at, and there is no evidence wherever you look for a spirituality beyond what we know while we are alive. And I was just thinking about all the new fields of knowledge that occur all the time. Particularly, I would say now we've got the internet, struggle though with it though I often do. We do seem to be finding out more ways of looking all the time. So I'm wondering whether we should have a slightly more open mind about what is proven and what is not, because there must be a great deal waiting to be proven and not proven that we don't even have the names for or the concept for at this point. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I think the number of things for which we have no evidence at all are legion. Whether you have whether it's God or unicorns or the Loch Ness Monster. Actually, the Loch Ness Monster, there is some mild evidence which I don't think is probably accurate, but it's perhaps better than the others. But we can believe an infinite variety of things for which there is no evidence, things the human mind can think up. And why should one pick one of them? I think people sometimes lean on it as a way of escaping from the dictatorship of evidence. Evidence, of course, will always be incomplete. Science is constantly building its models in more detail as more evidence is discovered, and very often dismantling some of them when more evidence is discovered. But nevertheless, that again, that is what humanists have decided to believe is the best way to discover truth. Spiritual is a word that I always greet with a little bit of suspicion. I know that some perfectly rational people say that there's a spiritual experience in appreciating nature and so on, or listening to fine music, but it's a word that I'm wary of, because I think it might just be a means of escape from facing reality. And reality is not entirely attractive, I admit.
And Einstein said, reality is an illusion, albeit a very persistent one. And I think he was looking at the idea with I wish I could remember the name of the guy at the moment, but there's a good scientist who did a lot of work in private sessions with Francis Crick, who elicited the structure of DNA, and Crick decided that the next interesting problem for science to work on was consciousness. And he held sessions in secret, meetings with good thinkers in science, because he just didn't want the hassle of the public debate. He wanted a sort of a place with, as it were, Chatham House rules, where scientists could be free to speculate. And there's an interesting American guy, Robert Bigelow, who's recently set up an institute for the study of consciousness. And he awarded over $1 million in prizes for essays on his initial question. And it's not the entire basis of the Institute for the Study of Consciousness, but was evidence for the persistence of consciousness after death. And he paid out well over $1 million in prizes to some really interesting writers who, as often as not, were looking at near-death experiences, and but equally were looking at other evidence for consciousness being non-local. And I regard that, I like to think that science doesn't have fixed views on things. You know, there's a danger in the climate world. Science says this, or science doesn't say this, as if there is, you know, as if the truth is unfixed. Whereas, you know, when I was learning science at school, I was immediately excited. I remember the first thing that really excited me about science was learning about de Broglie's views on wave-particle duality. And he was saying, you know, what's the difference between matter and energy? And de Broglie was coming up with this idea that they could be one and the same thing in some way, and that we had to discover a deeper science that explained both. And I want to throw in an irrelevance, but this is about science, sorry, about religion. I met two lovely, absolutely lovely Mormon boys on their, down by the harbour side, on their, you know, year of, or half year or whatever it is, of being ministering abroad. And we had a lovely discussion about different religions, and you know, asked them what they were thinking about, what they thought about Hinduism, where there's many views of God. We had this lovely chat, but I could see there was a moment when I noticed they were getting a little bit impatient, and that it was time to, you know, close in and nail me down in some way. So I said, well, look, tell me, are you members of one of the religions that believes that theirs is the only way to be saved, right? I had no idea how they would respond, but they looked relieved, actually, and they said yes, because I'm sure they were just about to launch into explaining why and how. And I you know, I knew we had to get away, we had to close in some way, and I was feeling a bit playful. So I said, would you do me a favor? And they said, what is it? I said, well, look, would you get together with all the other religions who have this view and figure out which one of you is right? Because it's only going to be one of them, before you come and talk to me about it. And because it's saved me so much time. And I mean, that's the one of the biggest, that's rather facetious of me to put it that way, but the biggest evidence against religion is the fact that there's so many of them, and they're so different, and they certainly don't agree amongst themselves. So why should they all be so evangelical about putting their word out? When is it just that misery loves company? And they want people to be convinced. They want to be the biggest. You know, we're the biggest, so we must be right. Whereas humanism seems to be a much more reasoned approach. But I would feel uncomfortable actually basing it on science, because I don't think science is a fixed thing. I think that science is a shifting ground, and you know, so one has to be even more open in having a foundation based not on science, but based on question mark.
You raised some number of wonderful points there, and I don't know if I didn't actually write them all down to be able to speak to them, but on the last one, which rather ties into the beginning of what you were saying as well, the science, yes, science is constantly changing because new observations are constantly being found. And the only thing that science means really is trying to build up a picture of the world from evidence rather than from any other imagining, and certainly to resist building the picture from desire. And of course, when you do that, very often your desires are left unfulfilled. And I suspect the person who invested £1 million in trying to find that there was some life going beyond the nerve cells, that he had a very strong desire, £1 million worth in his case, and or dollars or whatever it was. But that, of course, doesn't make it so. Yes, the Mormons are wonderful people. The idea that Joseph Smith received these this information on gold plates from an angel, which regrettably are not available for inspection.
Well, the angel was called Moroni.
Yes, it's really. I think you said in an earlier remark that religions were founded by great people. I don't think Joseph Smith was great. I think he was a wonderful forger, but amazing that people have lapped this up ever since. And the founders of other religions may not have been as great as all that. They may have been hyped up by those who built the religion following them. You had many other interesting points which I'd love to talk about, but I can't quite remember them.
I say David comes across with a number of points, and yes, right. Well, I didn't mean that as a put down, Mr. David. So there.
Well, there's in discussion amongst ourselves. Every year I come back to a modern German teacher called Otto Scharmer, who's radicalized in the German anti-nuclear protests in the 60s and 70s. And he was concerned about creating a form of dialogue in which we bring out what we need for the future. And every year he reruns a course called U-Labs, which is about theory U. And this U is intended to represent it's almost like I think about it as a German U with an umlaut, right? And the two dots could be labeled here and there, and it's about getting from here to there. And the answer is it's not by a straight line. It's you have to take this dive, which is his U process, and it's about coming into dialogue with others with an open mind and an open heart and an open will. And you can put other words against this, but open will is he regards as courage, and an open heart is compassion. And I forget what there's another word beginning with C for open mind, but it's basically that if you can be open to other
Could it be credulousness?
No, it's ordinarily we're so used to, in our discussions, it's criticism. it's being not critical. Often in an intellectual discussion, somebody will make a point and we're just waiting to make our counterpoint, to argue against it. And the ideal starting point, as far as Otto Schama is concerned, is that we suspend disbelief and criticism and are open to actually letting in what other people are saying. And he runs a wonderful course, and people, his real concern is to bring up the thinking that's needed for now. He calls it leading from the emerging future, and not basing everything on the past, which is his starting point on artificial intelligence was an artificial intelligence can have access to all of human knowledge. The only thing that's missing from an artificial intelligence is what we need to know to move forward. And I think this is, I don't know how this would fit in humanism. I do know that I feel it resonates with Quakerism, because Quakers are prepared to sit in silence, not argue with each other, and wait to see what's moved to emerge from what I would call the field of consciousness, to get away from, and there is already good evidence to suggest that consciousness is not localized in the nervous system. We may not be conclusive about what it is, but the idea that consciousness emerges from the functioning of the brain is pretty suspect. And nobody has. I have a New Scientist article, a book with all the different theories of consciousness in this. Because the New Scientist was saying nobody's got it right yet. So I think there's an interesting field in science to study consciousness, and humanism, I think, along with Quakerism, doesn't need to have a fixed idea about what consciousness is in order to be able to figure out what are appropriate ways for humans to live together on a planet.
Would you like to come back on that, Don?
Certainly have to agree on the last point. I think, again, you raised some very fundamental points. The artificial intelligence one, I think I can agree with, because artificial intelligence can work out solutions to problems, but it cannot work out what the problem is. It cannot work out values. A machine cannot have values unless the values are programmed into it by its maker. And if you study the works of Hume, the idea that no value conclusion can be reached without a premise that contains a value, and ultimately values come from within ourselves. Humans didn't say this, but it's ourselves as evolved creatures. As Hume said that reason can only be the servant of the passions. But the other really critical point that you raised is the one of evidence. Science looks at the evidence, makes theories, and then tests them against further evidence. And some of the theories are in the stage where they're never 100% proven, but they're so near 100% that we can accept them as facts. Science also has evidence for things which are less complete and which we can render probable. And then there are ideas or theories for which there is no evidence at all. And as I say, they can be legion. But many of the people who want to work outside science pick one of these theories that they like and say, well, why don't we believe this? We don't need to rely on science all the time. But they are believing something for which there is no evidence whatever. If there is evidence, then let's of course examine it. But consciousness, I think, is probably coming close to one of these. As machines become more complex, they're getting more to the point of appearing conscious to an outside observer. I know that when I try and communicate with my bank and I'm directed to a chatbot instead of a person, I feel that that particular machine has not got there anywhere near yet. But in principle, there's no reason why a closed system could not generate something which we would recognize as being consciousness. And the many signals being sent along nerve fibers in our brains, we know that that when these are damaged, we know that it affects a person's consciousness. We look at the famous case of Phileas Gage, who had an iron rod which exploded and went right through his skull. And he lived remarkably, but it was known that he was an entirely different man after that from previously. There have been many studies of consciousness. It's difficult to imagine that if the different functions which people admit are performed by nerve cells, if your vision was taken away and your hearing was taken away and all of your sense of touch was taken away, and so that you had no inputs, and then if your memory ceased to function, and we know that that happens within the brain, if all these elements were taken away, would you be conscious? I don't know. I think if you were, I think you could then take some more elements away, and I think it's wishful thinking to say that consciousness comes from somewhere else, and we must be constantly on our guard of wishful thinking, which of course makes humanism and atheism unpopular, because to some extent it's bad news, but it might be true. Sorry, I hope I haven't put too great a depression on our discussion.
We like a good discussion. I think Patsy would agree with me on that. Well,
I didn't mean to shut everybody up.
No. Yes, I think the where we come from in England today, we are kind of virtually allowed to have different views, a multiplicity of views. But if you go to other countries, sadly at the moment, and if you take it in Iran or Iraq, where if you're not Muslim, why aren't you? Kind of this type of thing. And I think it goes back to nearly to the 16th, 17th, and sometimes 18th century in England, that if you didn't have a religion, if you didn't go to church on a Sunday, you were kind of, unless you were working, of course, if you were one of the very, very poor who had to work, then you had a reason, but in a lot of cases, the religion had sometimes an oppressive idea upon people that is, I would suggest, is one of the reasons why in the last census, only 33% of people said they had a religion, which is quite...
No, I think it was a third that said they did not have one.
Pardon?
I think it was a third, a bit more than a third, that said they did not have one.
Yeah.
And slightly less than half were Christian. But yes, religion has in the past been oppressive, and And Christianity, when it was the same age that Islam is now, was probably as oppressive as Islam is now.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
But even quite recently, I grew up in Scotland, and in the area south of Glasgow where I was, everything was just about as moderate as it was in England at the time. But I had relations in some of the Hebridean Islands, and I used to go there for holidays, and religion was taken very seriously there. As a child, no form of pleasure on a Sunday was even permitted. Even to walk on the beach on a Sunday was considered very much not allowed. So but that was a throwover from previous history where such things existed throughout the United Kingdom. So religion has been moderating over the last century in UK, not necessarily in Pakistan.
True. Yes, there's a quite a remarkable story about that, which I think we've got a couple more minutes, but that is on Muslim religion within England today and within Pakistan, that type of thing. When Muslims started to come across to England in a greater extent, the large families, they brought the priests from the madrasas of Pakistan, which were kind of the very hard-line Muslims, who were taught from an early age. These boys were taught from early age and went to the religious teaching madrasas, called madrasas, and they came to England and were part of the Muslim teaching of England. But the amusing thing is that today, a lot of young people who are of the Muslim faith find it very hard to actually do the type of things which they're not there supposed, which the Imam said you should do. Therefore, now that the mullahs from those earlier days started to retire and started not to have to take part and die off type of thing, you have a more modern, more secular imam who realizes that they have to change because the young people want the same sort of things that their friends who are non-Muslims do. They want to be able to be more open, and they had to change. I've chatted to many a Muslim young person about this, and the idea is that they're slowly changing because they have to. And the biggest change, which is coming to them quite soon, is to have women mullahs. That's nearly heresy in it wouldn't happen in Pakistan, in India, in Iran, Iraq, Libya. That's just not happening. But in England today, it's happening. It's part of this change which has to happen within all religions for them to remain cogent, to remain relevant to their people.
Yes, of course, terrible clashes have happened in the minds of people who have come from a society where Islam was rigidly enforced and apostasy could be punished by death. And they come to a society in which the majority do not accept Islam. And someone who didn't accept Islam in where they came from was in a very bad position. And of course, most people did accept it for that reason, whether they believed it or not. But coming into a society where they're in a minority, it has to cause great stresses. And these stresses are being worked out, as you say.
Well, Angela.
Well, I think my second husband, Dauphin, is from Senegal. Islam there is very different from Islam in Pakistan. And I think when we make generalizations about other religions, we should be careful that where those those generalizations apply. Not a word that has been said about the debate about Islam applies in the Senegal and Casamance that I've first-hand experience of. That's all I'd want to say. Tolerance and understanding of others' different belief systems, I think, is essential.
Oh, I give a very hearty hear to that. Well, thank you, friends. I, for one, have enjoyed this last hour. It's been very informative. And I am pleased to know more about humanism than I did when we started. And thank you, Don, for your time and forbearance with us at times.
No, it's been a great pleasure. The only thing that I think I've missed out on is I haven't learned as much as I would like to about the Society of Friends, but I will continue to study that in other ways.
By the way, it started in 1650 in Penny Drayton.
I thought it started in 17 something.
1650.
1650.
Yeah.
Right. That's further back than I thought.
Yes, Fox and his lot were there at the start. Right. Now, friends, before we disappear for our lunch, I'd like to tell you what's happening next week. Don't we, Hattie? Hattie is going to, because she had in the last time she presented, it was on Japan, and she had so much there. She only got halfway through. So we've invited her back to continue her sojourn in Japan for a further session, which is next week on the 22nd.
Lovely.
So, as I say before, tell your friends, your family, your dog, anybody that this is happening, and they could have a very interesting hour as we've had before. Thank you, friends.
Thank you, Don. Thank you, Ray.
Yeah, thanks, Don.
And David and everybody.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Angela.
Thank you. Bye.